Good morning, boys and girls. I'm Eleanor Hawkins, and welcome to Telestory Time. Oh, this is the wonderful day of the year. Yes, this is. 'Twas the night before Christmas Day. And boys and girls, I collect the book very seriously and have hundreds of them. And I also have some items that go along with it. And I'd like to show some of them to you this morning. As you can see here, I have the night before Christmas ornament. And as you press a button, we can read the whole poem all the way through. Yes, this is a Christmas ornament. And then over here, we have an ornament that is a book. And as you can see, it's a book and we can hang it on the tree, and it's the night before Christmas. A beautiful little book. And then I brought along this little ornament that is, 'twas the night before Christmas, and actually it has a title right on the front of the book, The Night Before Christmas. And here is the whole poem of the first stanza, and then I have 8 of these that tell the whole poem in these little books. And then this is something very special. I want to show you this because the U.S. Postal Service actually printed a stamp in 1972, and up here above Santa Claus it says, "'Twas the night before Christmas." Yes, this is an 8-cent stamp back in 1972. And then, boys and girls, later in the show, I'm going to show you various editions of The Night Before Christmas from my collection, but here we have a little book that is smaller than my thumbnail, and it has every word of the poem in this tiny little book. And here we have, as you can see, a magnifying glass in case you can't read all the words. Yes, this is one of my favorites. It's the smallest book in my whole collection. And later on in the show, I'm going to show you different editions of The Night Before Christmas, and way back to 1882. But first of all, let me read you our story for this morning. And the very first one I have marked with my bookmark, and it's entitled, The Naughty Little Reindeer. 8 little reindeer stood side by side in their cozy barn eating their supper. "Oh, I've got to eat lots," said Dasher and Dancer. "So we can go fast," agreed Vixen. "All around the world we'll go," grinned Comet and Cupid. And Donder and Blitzen sang a sort of song, through the snow, bringing toys to the good girls and boys. But Prancer shook his head in the naughtiest way. "Not me," he said. "I'm not going." The other reindeer stopped eating. "Not going?" they cried. "Nope," said Prancer, "tired of going. This year I'll stay right here and wait for Santa Claus to come to me." And then he hopped into bed and pulled the quilt over his head. And just as he did, Santa Claus came into the barn. He whistled merrily to himself as he piled his sleigh full of wonderful toys. But when he saw only 7 reindeer ready to go, his face fell. "Well, where's Prancer?" he asked. 7 little reindeer pointed to Prancer's bed. The quilt moved uneasily, and Prancer peeped out. "Not going," he said. "Going to stay in bed." The other reindeer held their breath. They thought Santa Claus might be cross. Perhaps Prancer did too. "I'm getting a cold," said the naughty little reindeer, or maybe measles, or maybe both together. Oh, now that was a whopper. But Santa was not cross. He never had been cross, and he wasn't cross then. He just winked at his other reindeer and harnessed them to his sleigh. Out of the barn they dashed into the snowy night. Prancer listened to the sleigh bells. They sounded rather slow and not nearly so merry as on other Christmas Eves when he had gone too. And Santa's voice blew back with the wind. "Now, Dasher, now, Dancer," he called, "on Vixen and Cupid, on Comet, on Donder and Blitzen." For a moment, Prancer felt quite lonesome. He missed having his name called. "I don't care," he told himself. "I'm tired, and it's cold outside. Anyway, I've carried enough toys." It's time for some presents to be brought to me." With that, he curled up, wondering just what Santa Claus would bring to him. Oh, how Prancer hoped Santa Claus would hurry up and come back very soon. "But he can't hurry with only 7 reindeer instead of 8, thought the little reindeer. "Maybe he won't get all around the world without me to help. Maybe he won't get to all the good children's houses." Now, when Prancer said good, he remembered that Santa Claus never, never, never comes to anyone who is naughty. "Oh me," he cried, "I've spoiled everything. I was good all year, and now I've spoiled everything on Christmas Eve." Out of the bed he jumped, kicking his quilt. "Maybe I can still catch up," he cried. Out of the barn he streaked, and across the crisp white snow he skimmed over the housetops, faster and faster. And at last, quite out of breath, the little reindeer caught up with Santa's sleigh. It was on a housetop, and Santa himself was disappearing down the chimney. "Oh, thought I'd never catch up," panted Prancer, trotting toward his friends. "Shucks," said Comet, "we couldn't go very fast without 8. And my harness kept twisting because you were missing," Vixen said. "Well, I'm not missing now," said Prancer. He slipped into his place, and when Santa Claus came back, away that sleigh went, faster than ever before. All around the world it went, with the sleigh bells jingling wildly. Before long, the last stocking was filled, and the last toy was placed under the last shining tree. Then 8 tired little reindeer hurried home. They pawed the snow impatiently while Santa Claus opened the barn doors. They yawned and they blinked in the sleepiest kind of way. But when the doors were flung open, they weren't one bit sleepy anymore, because right in the middle of the barn stood a fat Christmas tree, all trimmed and lighted. And under it were new red blankets and new green feed bags and bouquets of crisp carrots and baskets of red apples and little boxes of sparkling sugar cubes. 7 little reindeer pranced into the barn with shining eyes. But Prancer stood outside, hanging his head. I expect there's only 7 of everything, sir," he whispered to Santa Claus. "I was pretty bad, and I wasn't getting a cold at all." Santa Claus chuckled and patted the little reindeer's head. "I know," he said, "and I knew you'd change your mind about not going. That's why I told Mrs. Santa Claus to fix 8 of everything for my 8 good little reindeer." And Prancer whisked his tail and tossed his head proudly. Into the barn he pranced, and sure enough, there were his presents waiting under the tree. Now, there was never a happier reindeer than that little Prancer. And you know what made him happiest of all was being sure that Santa Claus understands about everything, just as people have always said he did. And that is the story of the naughty little reindeer. And now, boys and girls, stay tuned, and I'll be back in just a moment to show you some old editions of The Night Before Christmas. Stay tuned. And now, boys and girls, as I told you before, I collect the poem very seriously and have hundreds of them. But this is one of the ones I bought for our son many years ago. And so as you turn this, it really reads the poem for you, but over here you can also read it with the illustrations. Yes, a real collectible. And boys and girls, I have some very old ones to show you. And these were all written and published back in the 1800s. And a lot of them are actually printed on cloth. And I'll show these as I tell you about how Clement Clark Moore wrote this poem back in 1822. You know, he was a Greek and Latin scholar. He taught at Trinity College in New York City, and he wanted to give something to his children on Christmas. And that morning, as he was going down to buy the Christmas turkey into New York City, he thought and thought about what he would give his children for Christmas. And he thought and thought as the butler took him in the sleigh in the snow going down to New York City to the market to buy a turkey for that evening's dinner. And, you know, on the way back, he actually composed the poem The Night Before Christmas. And you see, this is actually in cloth and a beautiful illustrated edition. And these are back in the 1800s. And you know, boys and girls, when he got home, he went right into his library and he composed the poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, that was called then. And here I have a replica of what he wrote that afternoon for his children in the library. And this is his actual handwriting, but a real nice reproduction. And you know, after dinner that night, they all went into the living room and they all sat down after they had hung up their stockings, and he read them the poem that I've just shown you. And you know, they loved it. It was for his 6 children. And you know, a relative was there and she loved the poem so that she took it home with her, and the next Christmas in 1823, that poem was published in the Troy Sentinel. And you know, so many people enjoyed it then that from then on it was published in almanacs, on calendars, and in poetry books. But no one knew that Clement Clark Moore had written that poem because he was a Greek and Latin scholar. And all that had been published anonymously all those years. But in 1844, he included in his poem whole collections of poems. And so we have known all about Clement Clark Moore all of these years and love the poem that we all read on Christmas Eve. And boys and girls, I want to show you one more that is very special to me. There are 2 that I'm going to show you real quick. This is The Night Before Christmas in muslin, and it's been used for so many years that you see. And there we come over to A Visit from St. Nicholas. This was published way back in the late 1800s. And then my very special one I have to share with you is this, The Night Before Christmas. And this is the one that my mother read for my sister and me every Christmas Eve when we were little children until she was 94. She read this poem for our family every Christmas Eve, and we loved it so much. And now, boys and girls, I have continued that tradition, and I read it to our family every Christmas Eve. And boys and girls, when we come back, I'm going to read you the beautiful poem, The Night Before Christmas. Stay tuned. And now, boys and girls, get very comfortable and ready to listen to the story, The Night Before Christmas. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. And the children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters, and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave a luster of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. With a little old driver, so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur, from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke, it encircled his head like a wreath. Oh, he had a broad face and a round little belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. Oh, he was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk. And laying his finger aside of his nose and giving a nod up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." That is the beautiful story, The Night Before Christmas. And now, boys and girls, stay tuned, and we have more Christmas stories in just a moment. And now, boys and girls, I'm going to read you the story, The Tiny Star. A very long time ago, there was a tiny star named Starlet. Oh, she was so small she could hardly be seen. All the other stars were much bigger and brighter than Starlet. At night, when people looked up at the sky, they saw all the big bright stars, but no one ever saw Starlet. One night, Starlet asked the other stars if there were some way she could twinkle and sparkle like them. Oh, but the stars just laughed and said, "Oh no, Starlet, you are far too small." Starlet felt very sad, and she began to cry. "No one ever sees me," she said. "I wish I were bigger." Later that night, the wise old moon heard Starlet crying. "Why are you so sad?" he asked. "Because," said Starlet, "I try to twinkle and sparkle, but I'm the smallest star in the whole sky, and no one ever sees me." "Oh, don't be sad," said the old moon gently. "How big or small you are is not important. Someday, somewhere, someone will see you." "But when?" asked Starlet. The moon smiled and said, "Someday, somewhere," and then he went away. Now many years passed. Night after night Starlet shone, but no one ever saw her. Then one night Starlet began to fall. She began to fall from the sky. Down, down, down she fell. Starlet landed gently on the roof of a little stable. Everything was dark and quiet. The only sounds she heard were those of the animals. Then Starlet heard a baby crying. Starlet looked inside the stable and saw a newborn baby lying in a manger. Oh, she thought, this stable is so cold and dark. Perhaps I can shine enough to brighten it up. So Starlet moved closer to the baby, and when the baby saw Starlet and felt the warmth of her gentle rays, he began to smile. The more the baby smiled, the brighter Starlet shone. The whole stable began to glow. Oh, it was a miracle. As Starlet grew brighter, she began to rise up, up into the sky, higher and higher, brighter and brighter. Starlet was now the brightest star in the sky. Everyone saw the magnificent star. This was the moment she had always wished for. And on that special night, shining over the little stable in Bethlehem, Starlet was the most beautiful star the world had ever seen. And I am the light of the world. The person who follows me will never live in darkness. He will have the light that gives light. And so, boys and girls, the tiny star Scarlet is the Star of Bethlehem that we see every year at this time of year. And now let me remind you, I want you to read The Real Christmas Story from the greatest book ever written. And here I have my Holy Bible, and it's a beautiful story that we all need to read this Christmas Eve. And boys and girls, I would like to remind you to be sure and ask your parents to maybe make it a tradition to read the night before Christmas and the real Christmas story every Christmas Eve. And boys and girls too, we want you to have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas. And we hope that you've been good and that Santa Claus will be very good to you. And so now, from all the libraries in the Craven, Pamlico, Carteret Regional Library System, from WCTI TV 12, and from Eleanor Hawkins and Telestory Time, we wish you a Merry, Merry Christmas.
You better not shout, you better not cry, you better not pout, I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. I'm making a list, I'm checking it twice, I'm gonna find out who's naughty